Hi, I'm Helen Earl. I'm a local ceramicist living on the Northern Beaches. I've put together this fun little kit in which you will make a mini planter pot.
Right, so you've picked up your kit and you're ready to start. It's a good idea to protect your work table with a chopping board or a thick piece of cardboard or an old plastic tray. You'll find in your kit are chucks. First of all, dampen that, squeeze out all the water, and this will become a damp surface on which you can work. You will also find in your kit a paddle pop stick like this, a homemade tool, a sgraffito tool, which is a paddle pop stick with a large paper clip attached, a brush, black underglaze, and a piece of clay. You will need to provide a water container. Low flat ones are the best. You need to be able to dip your fingertips into the water. And you will need to find something that becomes a tray or board that can hold your pot as you get into the later stages of making. Even a piece of cardboard will do, or an old coaster. So anything that will support the weight of your pot would be great. So keep these aside. You'll also find in your kit some paper towel, which at times we might rip up and place on top of our boards so the clay doesn't stick to our boards, especially if you're using the foam trays. So it's good to have a couple of these, perhaps two, so you've got one for your pot and one for your dish. Lastly, you'll find your clay wrapped in plastic, soft plastic. This is to keep it extra moist. You can unwrap that, put the plastic aside. You can keep this plastic just in case you have limited time and you want to make your pot in stages. If that's the case, you can wrap it up in the plastic and work slowly through the video. And you're ready to start with your piece of clay. Firstly, you need to make this piece of clay using this part of your hand, because that's the strongest, into, I guess, a sausage shape is what we'll call it. Then place it down on your chucks cloth, and now we're going to divide this piece of clay into the different parts for making your planter. So first of all, use your paddle pop stick just to mark the clay into 4 pieces, 4 even pieces, as even as you can get. The first part, the first quarter, we cut off and put aside. That is going to form the dish for your planter. Now you have 3 quarters left. On one of those quarters, you divide it again, so you'll have an 1/8, and you cut that 1/8 off. This piece will become the 3 legs of your planter. And then this piece is the pot part of your planter. So this piece you can now bang into a ball again using that nice strong heel part of your hand till it's smooth all over. If it's got a few wrinkles, you might like to just push the clay over it, because it's great if you don't have any wrinkles, as they're potential sites of the clay looking cracked. Okay, then you've got the ball of the clay. What I like to do is to make the legs first. So we might set aside our other pieces and take that little piece for the legs. And again, we're going to make a coil out of this. So we might bang it first into a shape, and then we want to roll it into a coil of about 9 centimeters long. To make a good coil, you want to do long rolls like this. If you do little ones, it gets flat on each side. So nice long rolling. I have put my chucks on a board. It could be a chopping board, it could be an old plastic tray, just to protect your table. So So you're rolling that till it's about 9 centimeters long, or till you think you can get 3 little legs. And look, if it is a bit flat, that doesn't matter. You can just bang it into shape, because it's going to get a little bit kind of wonky anyway when you join the legs on. So then you mark off 3 even pieces of clay, and these become your legs. And at this stage, you might want to just carefully make them into nice little legs that you stand up here on your clay, ready to go. Just making them into a nice shape. So they're roughly the same height. So if one's a bit longer, you can tap it gently, and you put those aside like that, ready to go. And then we're up to the next stage, which is forming the bowl of your planter, and we do that using making a pinch pot, which some of you may have done before. Right, we're ready to start making the pot plant of our planter. I've noticed my hands are drying out, and this can happen when you're using clay. So just dip your fingers into a shallow water container and rub the water onto your hands. So your hands are just moistened, because it's not good to get your clay really sloppy. So just slightly moistened hands make it easier to work with. Okay, so to make a pinch pot, we place the ball of our clay, and remember, we've got rid of most of the creases out of there. We place the ball of our clay into our hand, and we use our thumb to press down, and we press gently and evenly, and we slowly rotate the ball of clay in our hand. So you can see it's quite thick. That's fine, because we just want to do it slowly and gently. If you squeeze too hard, you get very thin parts and very thick parts. And the aim of the squeezing and pinching is to keep the pot walls as even as possible. So we're just squeezing it out. So you can see how thick the clay is. It's at least as thick as my finger. That's a good place to stop and think, oh yeah, that looks fairly even around the rim. Okay, and then you might just have one more squeeze closer to the bottom. So your thumb's down, and you're just squeezing the clay a little bit thinner down the base and around again. Just pinching gently. So it's still pretty fat on the rim, because that's what holds the shape of the pot. Now you can put the pot down onto your work surface and gently bang it. And have a look, have you got a small flat space? That's great, because you need that to join your legs. But your pot now is still a bit fat and not very big. So now, and this is really important, watch my hands. You want to use 2 hands, and you put them in onto the rim like that, and you push in and up, and you slowly rotate the pot, lifting it up and rotating. So now we're trying to pull the clay up into a taller pot to make the pot taller. So it's the same method, pushing around like that. And now you might even lift the pot into your hand and do a bit more shaping here. And again, see how my one hand is cradling the pot, and the other fingers and thumb are pressing. So we're basically shaping the pot. We want to make a tall pinch pot rather than a wide pinch pot. So again, I'm feeling the thickness of the clay between my fingers. They say that if you have no sight, that's often people with no sight make the best pinch pots, because they're using their touch sensation to figure out how even the thickness of the pot is. You might then want to put it down again and squeeze up again. So you're just trying to make it bigger and bigger, and trying to keep it in control, because we tend to squeeze too much and the pot gets wider and wider. And I might swap to moving my hands there. But as you can see, I'm constantly pinching gently and lifting the pot and moving it around and thinning it out. We want it to be like the thickness of a thick pike, is probably the best description. We don't want pancake thinness because it might, or crepe thinness, because then it won't be sturdy enough. And now it might be just a matter of feeling or looking and seeing where it feels a little bit thick. If it's still a little bit thick, that's fine. It's probably better to err on the thick side, because now we're going to turn the pot over and add the legs. And we can thin it out after we've added the legs. So turn your little pot over, and it doesn't matter if the rim is sloping a bit, and just think about where you're going to fit the legs. So we put them into a triangular configuration, and you might use one of your tools or your homemade tool, which was a large paper clip added to a paddle pop stick with masking tape, and you might just mark out where you're going to put your legs. It just has to be a little mark, a little spot like that. Put your legs down, and now we score or scratch the area where we're going to put our legs. And it doesn't matter if the scratching's bigger than the legs. It really, you can smooth it all over again. And then you do the same with the surface that you're going to join with your legs, like this. It's just roughing up the clay, like that. Then we want to make like what we call a slurry or a paste on our clay. So we just dip our finger into our water and rub it around a bit till you start sort of getting you see it's like a pasty slurry on your legs. So do that to all your legs first. Like that. And you can also do it to the pot. So it's only a little dip of water, not too much. You don't want it dribbling everywhere and saturating everything. And this is paper clay, so it's actually helped the paper or the cellulose fibres in the clay actually aid joining. So it's actually easier to join with paper clay than normal clay. And then we put it on. See how I'm twisting it till I see some of that slurry come out? And that one to the sides. And then we get our paddle pop stick. Don't worry at this, our paddle pop stick, our plain one, and we can push the clay onto smooth it onto our pot, and push some of that clay onto the base of the pot. So the legs might get a little bit thinner, and they might move around to the outside. There's lots of refinements we still do. So we want those legs really well joined. You might even like to use, sometimes you can't get the stick in. It's good actually, if you know your stick can get in between the three legs, you know you're going to have room for the hole in your planter pot. So that's another thing. You can also use your fingers and sort of even up your legs. So this is the hardest part of making our planter, is joining these legs. So spend a little bit of time on it. When we think they're well joined, we can turn them upside down. And if our planter has a bit of a tilt, I might pinch that leg longer and look around and keep joining it. And I might splay the legs out a bit so I really know that it's going to hold its weight. It's quite soft, so I might leave like thinning it out a bit more till after I've made the dish. You can at this stage though, of course, make the hole in your planter. So you take your paddle pop stick, you select where you think the middle is, and push down and turn as you push. So you're like screwing the hole into the planter pot. You get a nice clean hole from the inside, but then on the underneath it's a bit rougher, but smoothing this out helps more joining of the legs. So it's actually good to have that extra clay to help join your legs. And if you want, you can do some more smoothing. So that's your little planter, and I'll come back and probably make it a little bit bigger after I've made the dish. It'll just firm up a little bit more. And I can straighten the legs up while it's still quite, right up until it's a lot firmer. So that's your little planter pot. And then your last piece of clay is for the dish, the water dish for your planter pot. So in this case, you just need to, again, we'll wet our hands. My hands are drying out a bit. Get them with a little bit of moisture so the clay doesn't suck more moisture out of my hands. And I can just bang this into a ball. Or if it's so small it's almost hard, you can just squeeze it between your fingers. What you're trying to do is squeeze a nice circular shape. So push it in there, squeeze. So you're just squeezing it out into a circle. So you don't need a fancy rolling pin or anything like that. Your fingers, and you're learning a lot about clay by using just your hands, because clay is about gauging thickness and thinness and making the clay particles strong by pressing the clay together. So you can make this you can probably go a little bit thinner with this, because you need it big enough to turn the sides up and make your dish. But you try to keep it fairly circular. And you might even want to just press it down now into your circle shape like that. So now you're ready to just make the sides of the dish, and that's simply done by just turning up a very small edge of the clay, lifting it up as you go, like that. And it's quite floppy, a little bit hard to use. It's now a good time too to maybe move your little tray onto a piece of board or cardboard, perhaps, maybe a foam tray that sometimes some vegetables come on, or even an old coaster. I'll use the cardboard because that's the thing easiest to get. So you can put your little tray onto that, and you can push it out a bit too. And if you find there's little cracking edges, you can just get a tiny bit of water, not too much because it makes the clay too soggy, and smooth it over. Probably the biggest mistake beginners make is using too much water. You have to keep your hands damp and the clay damp, but not saturated. So that's ready too for painting. And you can check that your planter fits into your dish, just on this one. If it's not quite big enough, you can always press the clay out a bit more and stretch the dish out bigger, just by pressing. And just gently press it so it's nice and light. So it's going to sit in like that. Great, we've now made the parts of our pot and we're ready to paint. Just before we do that, you'll notice I've removed my chucks and I've placed my items onto pieces of cardboard and some paper towel. This is the point too where you might like to use the edges of your chucks and just clean up your hands, or go and wash them before you start painting. You might also like to just refine your pot just a little bit more now that you've maybe let it sit for 10-20 minutes and it's dried out a little bit, and you just want to make the rim of the pot look really good. You want to make sure the legs are nice and even. You can paint straight away, but it's actually quite good to paint when the clay is just firmed up a little bit, because it's easier to handle the pieces. So one of the best times to paint the design and use the sgraffito technique on your pot is when the pots become leather hard. So you can see it's still slightly flexible, but not, it could even be a little softer than that, but it's not really floppy. So that's the best time to paint your pot. If you're rushed for time and you want to do it all in one sitting and you don't want to use the sgraffito technique, then you can just paint it as I have in this one, with no scratching, just painted dots and dashes. Right, so now I'm going to demonstrate the painting. I've also just tidied up the rim so it hasn't got any cracking. And the theme of our planter painting was dot, spot, dash. It's a really good idea when you're making designs on objects to sort of limit yourself with your ideas and yet from that limited space expand out. So one of the great things about simple dashes and dots is it's very easy to paint underglaze in that method. So I've wet my little brush slightly. I've dipped it into the underglaze. And for instance, if I just want to do dashes around the rim, I just do that. And you'll see that after a while you'll run out of paint, so you'll dip again. And that's what I call a dash. So just brushing the pot around like that. And that's probably the simplest place to start. Oh, I forgot. Probably the most important thing is to put your name on the pot before you go any further. The easiest way is to, and this is on the soft pot, remember, is to paint your name inside. The reason it's so important for your name is all these pots are going to turn up at Brookvale Studio Ceramics and be fired, and then you collect them at a later date. So they need to know whose pot belongs to who. So one of the easiest things, because it'd be covered up with soil, is just to paint your whole name inside the pot using the brush. And you might want to keep the paint a little bit thinner. So I'm painting my name. I'm not sure if you can see that with the overhead camera. And much better to do a whole name rather than initials. So it doesn't matter if your name's upside down, you'll be able to read it. You can, of course, paint your name on the base or around the side. For instance, if I take this one I painted earlier, you can also wait till it's dried and paint. I've painted a line of black earlier, and then I can just scratch my name into there. So that's also the way you can put the name on your dish. I just advise doing that early on so you don't forget, but you can put your name on any time, but just don't forget. So that's scratching with the tool, and then just brush away the bits. So that's one also way of putting your name. So what we want to know about design is we've got our planter pot and it's in the round. We might want to divide the surface up into sections and repeat that section around. So we use a lot of things like repetition to make good designs. So you see in this, there's lots of repetition of the dot. We sometimes use a focal point where we paint a big spot, and that becomes a focal point because it's much bigger, and this is just pattern filling in between. You can think about radiating designs, so making it circular with at a central point and radiating out. There's lots of different ways you can paint the pot. So one of the things, if you want to use the sgraffito if you want to finish the pot in one go, you probably can't use the sgraffito technique because the pot needs to have dried out a little bit. But if you just want to do dots and dashes, then you just pick the pot up and you start painting. And sometimes it's just that simple repetition of line. And notice if I put my lines going downwards like that, that's a very different approach to if I paint the lines diagonally. And then I might put a line there to divide the shape up. I might decide to divide around the base like this. It's really up to you how you design it. But then if I contrast those lines with the next space being sideways, you get another feel. So really have a think about how you might like to make your pot have a really sort of funky design, and often it's just by changing direction, by using emphasis, by using focal points, repetition. You don't have to do fancy patterns. The simple line or dot can work really well. So you can see how the contrast of those two same way of painting, just change the direction of the dash. Or you might like to use just dots. And it could be, again, we might divide the space up, and just using the tip of our brush we get a dot. So again, that's a different pattern, but hasn't required us to manipulate the brush in complicated ways. And you would continue that pattern. Or you might divide, go, oh, I think I want a big solid black piece. I'm going to do a half a spot at the bottom. So you constantly contrasting that black and white idea. So there's many ways you could do that. What I've done though, I made some pot earlier and it's a bit dried out because I want to show you the sgraffito technique. Here, this is why it's good if the pot's a bit firmer, because when you lift it down, it can be a bit soft. So this is a pot I decorated earlier and I want to show you the sgraffito tip. Sgraffito just means scratching. So, but we can get some really cool patterns by using that method. So on my circle, I might start by drawing a circle within the circle. And another circle within the circle. You'll get a little bit of rough clay, coming there, and you can just scratch away. You get like a radiating design, like a little mini sun. And you get the contrast of the white against the black. And it might be that you want to do more scratching in the middle. Here's an example from earlier where the scratching makes a really effective pattern and echoes the pattern that I've just made on the pot. Another place you could put your name is by painting black and scratching into the base of the pot there as well, if you didn't want to paint the inside. It's good to have your name. You could also paint it onto the bottom. Or as I said before, you just paint a strip of black like this. Let that dry off a little bit. And then scratch your name onto that. And leave enough room for the last name. Good to have first and last name so the ceramic studio can easily identify your work. So, I hope you have fun decorating your pot.
So once you've finished making your planter pot, you will need to get it fired. In your kit, you'll find a voucher for Brookvale Ceramic Studio. You take it down there and leave it there for them to fire. To pack it for transportation, get a small box and maybe a little bit of bubble wrap or some tissue paper and place it in the box and you can transport it safely that way. Well, I hope you enjoyed making your mini planter, the Spot Dot Dash planter. Don't forget to ensure that your name is clearly marked. And if you want to show me your creations, then feel free to tag me on Instagram at Helen Earl Art, all one word. Thank you.